right.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's Norbert here with Luke Ranieri. Luke, say hi.
Just
Hello. Just for everybody to know that I haven't been streaming for a while and I'm out of practice now. So if anything goes wrong, if we freeze and stop streaming or something like that, don't go anywhere. We're just going to switch to something different. We just start a new stream that won't be that fancy, but still it's gonna work at least. Yeah, so just bear with us, okay? All right. Nice to see all the comments.
yeah. Hi everyone. Salvete.
Salvete, exactly. So, this is just a hangout session, Q&A. You will be able to ask your questions to me or to Luke, and we're making it because of the video we've made recently, and it's been very successful. You seem to very like it. I loved it too. That was definitely one of the best videos so far. I'm attached to all my videos, like they are like my babies. But but this recent one was very unusual because you don't get to hear spoken Latin that often.
Well, hopefully that'll change. Hopefully we've inspired quite a few people, perhaps 100,000 or more, to take an interest in learning Latin, because now they can.
Absolutely, and you're a great example that it's possible, right?
And it is possible.
Yeah, it is possible, and actually today we are going to talk more about it, about Latin culture, but not Latin culture from Latin America, but Latin as the classical Latin culture, and let's just see what's going on in the comments. Everybody's saying hello. In all languages, we have people from all over the world here.
Yeah, Russian. Dobry večer. That's nice.
Yes, I see Mike here. Cześć, Mike. Mike always visit my streams. Yeah, a lot of people. So I know you may all have questions to Luke or to me, but we need to set some structure here, so we are not going to get lost in all the comments in the comment section. So my suggestion is that I will start the conversation with Luke. I have some questions prepared for him, and then there will be a time for your questions, and I will tell you that okay, now it's the time to type your questions in the comments box, and I will start reading them. I think that would be much more efficient than just browsing through so many comments and looking for random questions. I think that sounds
good.
Sounds like a plan, right?
Yeah. Concilium. It's a plan.
Concilium. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing how the meaning of the word has changed. From what it used to be. It's most surprising sometimes. And actually, I know that in Latin specifically, there is like so many false friends, you could say.
Oh, there absolutely are. More than you get between Romance languages, because the Romance languages themselves, for the most part, are more related to one another than any of them is related to Latin. They kind of grew up together, something like children, and therefore are somewhat distant from the parent in a few ways.
Yeah, definitely. So why don't we start just with this question about what's your adventure with Latin? Like how did you start with Latin? How long have you been doing it so far?
Yeah, and I love how you put it, the adventure with Latin, because it really is. And I think anybody who has tried to do what I do, that is to speak Latin with other people and to learn it well, has felt it to be an adventure. And for me, it's always been an enjoyable experience. I started by looking at some old books that belonged to my father's late brother, he was interested in Latin and ancient Greek, so I had a book and I was able to look through some of the grammar. I was like, oh, this is interesting. I had already, for reasons that will be obvious, since all of the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out when I was in high school, I was interested in, like, can one learn Elvish? And the internet started to exist back then, so I was looking into Quenya, for example, one of the Elvish languages, and I found a grammar book which was teaching all the basics of the Elvish language, and included a lot of complicated things like grammatical cases. I already had basic grammatical cases from my German class in high school, but this was much more complicated. So it was more like the Finnish language or something. So, and it was fun to play around with for a little bit. But then I realized, I want to learn Latin at some point. And that little bit of exposure, combination of the background in German, and then seeing some old books, I was like, okay, well, I want to take this class in college. And I did in my freshman year, but I did well in it, but it was just the basic grammar translation with a textbook that some of you out there may know called Wheelock's Latin, which is just an English language explanation of how the grammar works. And it's regarded as not as good only so far, but not a great way to learn Latin alone. Maybe a consultation book, but whereas something else like Familia Romana, which I don't have right here, but it's a fantastic book where you can actually learn to read Latin fluently in a matter of a few months if you're reading the book every single day, and therefore you'd be a fluent reader, whereas something like most other traditional methods weren't providing that. So once I got that book, I decided that I need to just commit this to memory, so I decided to transcribe every single chapter, so read it aloud and transcribe it. And then suddenly I was completely in love with this language. It was something that I realized that would never leave me.
Wow, so that's a very brief recount on how you learned it. But I'm pretty sure it's been a pretty long process, right? Or it was full of different stages that you've been going through.
Absolutely. That was really the first stage. That was the first critical stage. And the most important, I think, how to learn it so you can read any text with basic fluency, where you have enough grammar and vocabulary to know what's going on. So I had that. The other end of this, earlier period of mine was being able to actually speak it with other people. And the start of that was since I was studying Italian in Italy that year in 2005, I found a very few people, 2 total, who actually spoke Latin, one in Florence and one in Milan. And one in Milan, Giancarlo Rossi, he's a fantastic fellow and has a group of Latin speakers up in Milan, and I got to meet him. That was really cool. And I found another teacher, both of them retired, in Florence, where I was living, who also spoke Latin. So I got to practice a little bit, and I had Italian to fall back on as something similar. So I was able to, use some of that to converse with these people. But and that was really it until I started to use the internet more, started to make a YouTube channel, made some videos, and eventually, though, I wanted to go and actually be in a proper immersion setting, and I found one in Lexington, Kentucky. And every summer, in person, this year being an obvious exception, they have these wonderful conventicula. A conventiculum, which is just means meeting, where for a week everybody signs a little thing where they say they're going to speak just Latin with all the participants for the whole week, so that everybody gets a good immersion experience. And there can be upwards of 90 people at them at some times. And that's just one example that now exists all over the world. In Italy, Roberto Carfagni has a great school. Vivarium Novum exists, Greco Latino Vivo, the Rusticationes that exist for the Salvi in the North America. They're all over now, so which is great. But when I did that finally in 2009, that was like, I've truly achieved this goal of being able to speak Latin with people for a whole week, for 8 days. And that was really what made me feel like I achieved my goal. And that was 2009. So I guess a 4-year span.
Wow, that's interesting, because it was all kind of before the internet. I mean, the internet was already there, but it wasn't that active, right? You couldn't find
considerably
that many
more
resources. Yeah,
not like today, no.
So
YouTube was in its infancy.
So your approach was you started with books. You just read books, all those grammar books about Latin, or there are some textbooks for Latin, right? That you
yes.
You found it. You found it in your town's library or something like that?
Oh
Or
no, I bought it, and I actually have the original one is back behind me of Familia Romana, and it's wonderful because it's kind of like it's a combination of a novel and a children's storybook because it's filled with pictures, but there's no English or Polish or Italian or any other vernacular language. It's only Latin, and just with pictures, you learn everything. You learn all the grammar. Everything is clearly explained. Yes, you too could learn Latin already.
yeah, but it sounds interesting because just like Latin, well, it is an ancient language, right? Like we don't really use it like we used to these days. So you just grabbed a book and you learned Latin from it. Like, what about the audio resources?
That's a good question. So because of my experience with Italian and German up to that point, I had, and I'd already taken French as well. So I had a broad enough understanding of phonology of languages. I have an accent when I speak Italian or even Latin or whatever language I speak today. But I was always very interested in the sound of language, maybe because I did a lot of singing in high school, and I wanted to really enjoy the sound of the language and really get into it because it helps. It's part of the language's good pronunciation, and therefore I was there are books such as the book Vox Latina by Sidney Allen, which talks about the pronunciation of classical Latin. So I applied the rules that he basically says in there, which can be found in other books besides his, and then I was able to understand Latin pronunciation simply through the books, based on my knowledge of Italian and other languages.
And it all was happening in high school?
All college. I was freshman, sophomore, and junior, really is where those years I was just mentioning, mostly sophomore.
All right.
Second year of college.
So what did you study at university or in college?
Geology.
Geology.
I have a bachelor and master's in geological sciences.
So it has had nothing to do with Latin only or linguistics.
No, it's actually really because of this interaction with this wonderful community of people who are experts at speaking Latin and writing Latin, or who are just beginners. That has motivated me so much to want to become a part of it more and more, to the point where all I want to do is spend all of my time on whether it's teaching or making videos for YouTube that are about teaching Latin, and as well as a few other things.
Okay. So now, what about now? Like, are you more focusing on linguistics and Latin, or you still doing your geological thing?
I haven't as much, no, because I'm also in the National Guard, which is mostly a part-time reserve military service, and that's what I do part-time currently. And but I've also done that full-time. So since I graduated flight school a few years ago, I've been doing some full-time teaching, been doing some full-time research that's related to geology, and also a full-time military thing. So I've been doing all sorts of things, which has been a nice opportunity to figure out what it is I like, what it is I'm good at, and what it is I want to spend my time on. And I can definitely tell you it's some of the most fun I've had is this interaction with these people who want to learn to speak Latin.
That's interesting. So I think it's a good moment now to ask our viewers if they have any questions to whatever you've just said. Maybe they want some clarification. So let's just have a look at the comments. So guys, now if you want to ask a question, just write a question word with the capital letters, so I can easily identify the question, and I'll have a look. Okay, yeah, I'm looking through the comments and looking for questions, so if you can ask them now.
I saw one I could answer.
Okay, if you found something, go ahead.
Someone asked where I went to university. That was from Christopher Bonis. Salve, Cristofore. So I went undergrad to Lehigh University, which is here in Pennsylvania, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and I did my master's at San Diego State University, which is in California.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We have a question from Andro. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever read the book Auricula Maretricula?
I haven't, though I think I've heard of it. I don't have anything else I can say about it, though.
Okay. Okay. So I see we have people who are really into Latin here. Maybe they're coming from your community too. Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a good question from
Mm-hmm.
Nanma. Do you get the chance to learn to speak other variations of Latin, for example, Vulgar Latin?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. Yeah, that's something we can talk about for a few minutes. And while I answer it, I guess if you want to find some more questions, we can do that. There's a term called Vulgar Latin, so let's understand that. So vulgar, from Latin vulgaris, is from the word vulgus, and vulgus means the people. It related to the English word folk or German Volk, which just means the people. So vulgar would mean something of the people. In English, the meaning vulgar, of course, has a connotation of being mean, because people who are not noble, not polite, would then be, vulgar and polite is the idea. It's kind of actually it's a classist term from an earlier time in English history. And other languages. So Vulgar Latin refers to the language of the people. But if we go back far enough, certainly the late Roman Republic, whether through the 200s and 100s BC, the 2nd and 1st century BC, and around that time period, basically Classical Latin and Vulgar Latin are not at all separate entities. They are the same thing. For example, the way that I'm speaking now is not exactly the way I write. The way I write is somewhat more formal, if I'm writing especially more complicated things. And that's true of most people. When they learn how to write, they learn how to write well, and learning to write well involves complex thoughts and certain vocabulary choices. But also the way I'm talking now, because I'm in front of this group of people, I'm talking a little bit more formally than I would if I'm talking with close family members. So that is sort of a distinction of register, right? And when we talk about Vulgar Latin, what are just the common people saying? We know a lot about how they speak in the classical period, from not only inscriptions but proper writing, and then as the language changes, because there are changes that happen. Obviously, the Romance languages are different from the way Classical Latin is written. What happens is that the way that people write remains very much fixed. But the way that people speak and the grammar they use from during the Roman Empire and then after ends up changing and diverging to the point where eventually, in the 800s AD, in the 9th century, written Latin becomes a separate spoken Latin thing, which is no longer connected with the Romance languages. So Vulgar Latin, really, depending on the century, could be anything that the people are speaking. Vulgar Latin is, if you want to speak Vulgar Latin, you can. It's just called Italiano, Español, Portuguese. Those are modern forms of Vulgar Latin. And Classical Latin is also kind of technically is partially Vulgar Latin of the century it was created in, if you will, or formalized. So no one can really speak Vulgar Latin unless you speak a vernacular form of the language, and there's 5 big ones which exist: Romanian, Italian, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and others like Sardinian, Catalan, and so forth.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good answer here. There is actually a lot of questions about pronunciation of Latin, especially the one that you used in the video. I saw a lot of comments like that. uh, under the video as well, some people got confused and they said, this is not how Latin is spoken or should be spoken. Or so there is definitely like different approach, many different approaches to it. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that,
Absolutely. Well, I can. Well, first, of course, although I speak Latin fluently, I definitely have an accent which is influenced by my native language, English, and I try to reduce that as much as possible. I try to give my Latin a feeling which is something like Italian or Spanish in the intonation, the prosody. So that's just one aspect of it. So I do attempt to make my Latin sound like it is the mother language of the Romance languages, and that's very conscious. Despite my accent things that I do, which I can talk about my English language faults that occur when I speak, not just Latin, but Italian or Spanish. That aside, there are specific things which are very obvious to people, like the sound of a letter C-E or C-I. One word would be the word for dinner in Latin, which is cena. In Italian, it's cena, for example. And the pronunciation of Latin that a lot of people are familiar with is usually called Ecclesiastical Latin, or it's known as the traditional Italian pronunciation of Latin, where for over the course of hundreds of years, Latin has been used and pronounced by people in Italy up to the present day with the pronunciation system, which I can talk about its history at a different time, but essentially it's very similar to Italian because when you have a word like, for example, to pronounce is one way to say pronounce in Latin is pronunciare, but in Italy and also in Ecclesiastical Latin, it's usually pronunciare, which is much more similar to the Italian word. And those kinds of things where you have a ts sound, those are developments which do happen in Latin, but they happen at a later stage than the kind of pronunciation I try to cultivate, which as narrowly as I can is focused on the 1st century BC. And maybe if there's time, we could talk about developments, but I already made some videos about that people can go look at, like how they changed and when. So the pronunciation of a w instead of a v, that v sound happens much later, in later centuries AD, whereas the sound of w is certainly the sound of most speakers in the city of Rome, which is a sort of dialect we're trying to cultivate with classical Latin in the 1st century BC, the sound of, say, Virgil and Caesar. And those are the big ones. So ch and j, those sounds don't occur in any form of Latin that we can see, according to our linguistic research, until the 5th century AD. So like the 400s AD is when ch and j, where you get cena, where you get gemma instead of gena and gemma, or something like that.
I see. So you said you made some videos about it, right? So if someone is interested, which channel they should go to see them?
That's a good question, because there are I do have them on both on ScorpioMartianus as well as on Polymathy, wherein ScorpioMartianus is meant to be entirely in Latin and ancient Greek, because there's just not enough channels out there which are only in Latin and ancient Greek. And the other one, Polymathy, I talk about things in English a little bit more in depth sometimes. So the one that I'm talking about, though, is a talk I gave at the Paideia Institute's Living Latin in New York a few months ago. And that's on ScorpioMartianus, where I actually give from 500 BC to 500 AD the most significant changes to Latin and ancient Greek. And that's what it's called, change of those languages' pronunciations.
Yeah, so you said that you and some other people decided to cultivate this particular dialect of Latin, right?
That's an interesting question, too. It more arrives that starting with the great scholar and teacher Erasmus from the Renaissance, and then later more and more people discover that, wait a minute, the way that we pronounce Latin today, whether it's in Poland or Germany or Spain or Italy, which were all different at the time, isn't the way that the ancients must have done it for a variety of reasons. And they started to figure this out. They started to read the ancient grammarians were saying that the sound of the letter K is totally useless, for example, because the letter C does the same job. So yeah, you can spell Cana with a K, but it sounds exactly the same as with a C. And when the ancient grammarians said that, they're like, oh, well, wait a minute, then it couldn't possibly be Cena or Cena, like it is in the German pronunciation. It must be Cana. And that's how they started to develop that, such that by the late 1800s, in many places like Germany and the United Kingdom, in schools everywhere, they adopted this classical pronunciation. Perhaps it was partly with a desire to separate themselves from the church or ecclesiastical Latin, but I don't know about that per se. Mostly it was just because they wanted to, if we're studying the literature of the 1st century BC so much, we want to use the pronunciation of that time period.
So the literature, the availability of the literature, and maybe the resources from that period made them decide to maybe we should dive more into this dialect and this particular way of speaking, because you could kind of reconstruct that easier. It was easier for you to reconstruct than just picking another dialect from somewhere that didn't produce that many resources, maybe.
And better understanding of linguistics, that is the study of comparative phonology, the study of language change, and so forth.
Okay, so that's actually very interesting that you're trying to reconstruct something from that period, the classical Latin. And when we are learning modern languages, they are changing all the time, evolving. Every year you have new words coming in, and I wonder how the usage of Latin like this, like you do and your community, affects Latin. Did you stop reconstructing it and started just leaving it and evolving and going forward, or?
That is a wonderful question. I have lots to say about that. Wonderful question. So
thanks.
Because that is a big deal. So because as these communities have come together, such as the wonderful Conventicola in Lexington, as well as other places, certain idiomatic usages start to become current. They start to become common. And sometimes people have invented certain usages which can't be found anywhere in actual Latin literature written either by the Romans or by the people after the Romans, like in the Middle Ages or in the Renaissance. That is, they were innovating things either because they're Anglicisms based on English, or they could be Italianisms. That's an inevitable it sounds bad, but contamination, if you will, a kind of mixing of.
That really sounds bad.
It does sound bad, but it's to observe it from a linguistic point of view. It's very normal. It's very expected. Like if I were, for example, if I get to learn Polish someday, Jan Oko, the wonderful Ioannis Okulus, I know his name, has been teaching me just a bit of Polish, and hopefully he'll keep teaching me Polish. But if I do, inevitably, not only will I have an American accent, I will have Anglicisms in my speech until good teachers make sure I don't use them too much. The same thing if I speak any other language. And that's about cultivating the idiom. But the problem is we don't have a large group of native speakers, which a lot of material, that are talking today. We do have some very good speakers, people who speak Latin so much better than I ever could, who are out there, including Daniel Pedersen, Patrick Owens, and other greats, Terence Thunberg and Wilfried Stroh, and so forth. And they're using really good, correct idiom that is truly not just Roman, but the same idiom that's been cultivated this whole time. And that's the really interesting thing about Latin, is that the reason it exists as something separate, that it's not like just an antique previous version that, it's not like Latin didn't just stop. Latin has been continuous for 2,200 years. And even though people have been very few from the 1800s and 1900s, and now surging again in numbers of speakers and writers, it has never gone away. So there's this continuous holding hands tradition, which is so cool. It's not like reviving, I don't know, a specific dialect of ancient Greek or something, or I'm trying to think of something else that's more, or trying to revive proto-Germanic or Gothic. Like no one has continuously used Gothic in the way that people have continuously used, or say, or the Proto-Slavic language, which, to my knowledge, doesn't have any writings anywhere, which would be equivalent to Latin and the Romance language, right? That doesn't exist. So reviving it would be cool, but it's not something that's continuously to the present day. And the reason it exists as a separate entity that's not the Romance languages is because people have been always cultivating the same literature, the same way of writing of the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. That is, the classical Latin literature is the foundation. So we do have lots of native speakers. They're just from 2,000 years, and they've written a certain way. So as far as Latin evolving, that's a really interesting question. Effectively, no. This is what makes it a non-living language, and why you can call it a dead language, or as we prefer to call it, an immortal language, because it's been, the most of Latin usage by the sheer number of millions of people was long after the Western Roman Empire went extinct, after it collapsed. And the vast amount of Latin literature, like 90% of Latin literature or more, is after the 800s AD. So that's what's preserved to this day. So, and everyone is, depending on their level of education, is trying to use the best Latin from the best authors from the classical period. So effectively, no, Latin is meant not to evolve, but we have a lot to choose from. It's not like we're limited. We have lots of vocabulary, dialects, choices, register, things like that. I think I answered the question now.
Yeah. But, I really like that you said that Latin is an immortal language, because it has never died, really. It just changed. The way it was used was changed. The culture has changed. The communities using this language also changed, evolved, but the language has never been stopped, and it's been interesting, really. But now we are entering like a new era, right? Like with the internet and even what you're doing and many other Latinists, right, are doing. Like there's a lot of new content coming up online, new communities are being built and things like that. So it's interesting to see, but obviously majority of people are not that interested in learning Latin because they don't really see the same value as learning, I don't know, English or other modern languages, right?
Definitely, no doubt.
So some people here asking, like, why would someone want to learn Latin?
That's a really good. That's a very good question. Well, it's obvious that if you want to live in a foreign country or work in a country where that language is necessary, even for example, if an Italian moved to Poland, that Italian better know English probably first, right? And eventually they'll learn Polish, but you need English to work in the international realm, just as one used to need Latin to work in the international realm for hundreds of years, 1,000 years, after the vernacular languages were already separate from Latin. So why today? Why in the early 21st century would anyone want to bother? Well, there are lots of reasons, and they do principally connect to the literature. Because we have these all of you out there may have probably heard of the authors I'm about to mention. Cicero, Caesar, Virgil, Ovid, Horace are just some of the classical authors who have created some of the most beautiful poetry, some of the most important writings on philosophy, on history. Seneca, Tacitus, Apuleius, Plautus. I go on and on just listing these great authors, which are the foundation not just of Latin literature, but every other literature in Europe that came after. Everybody who is anybody was learning to read Latin and reading the same things, which is why we see, especially in the Renaissance, a resurgence of artwork, paintings, and sculpture, which are classical themes of gods and goddesses and Hercules and heroes, and this rediscovery of it. So much of our literature is inspired by that. So if you want to go to the source of basically what we have culturally, linguistically in our languages that come from Europe, including English, not just the Romance language, but English and German as well, so much of them is inspired by that and built off of that foundation. It's fun to go back and learn more. So that's one reason. But what about accessing the literature itself? What do you get? You get philosophy and thinking about people who were people just like us. They were people just like us. And yet we have these wonderful scenes that are preserved in writing of day in the life, as well as high philosophy and beautiful art, which are just like the best things that are created today. And you can access the mind of Cicero. You can access the mind of Virgil and feel the way they feel. The way their words end up moving you are the way they could have moved their own readers, their own audiences. And because of that, it creates this connection where we can compare our society, which in some ways is similar to the ancient Romans, and in some ways incredibly different, because we have, of course, obviously modern technology like electricity, and they had institutions like slavery. And yet they talked about freedom. They talked about, Seneca, for example, brought up the fact that, wait a minute, these slaves are just human beings. Why do we treat them as if they're animals? That kind of thing. These original, philosophies about the human condition is essentially the same. The way we are is essentially the same. So if we get the chance to access wisdom, we should access it from wherever we can. And then to compare it to something so different, so similar and different at the same time as the ancient Roman world, and this goes ditto for ancient Greek, then that's massively important, I think, that at least some people, if some people in our society continue to cultivate that, then it continues to resonate. I mean, otherwise there would be no popularity for things like Gladiator. Why is Gladiator popular? Because that movie, which takes place in that setting, uses all of those themes in that world, is just the story of a man who's going through things that we could picture ourselves going through. Well, imagine you could do that in the native language of the people that are experiencing them at the time. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you're saying it's more for this direct experience, right? Because obviously some people can translate it into modern languages, and you can still have access to that knowledge. But
can you? Because if I get a translation into English of, you name it, Cicero, Virgil, Caesar, and that translation's from the 1800s, it really will not be my English. It'll be a little bit different, and some idiomatic usage if it's more British instead of American, for example. And I can stretch my understanding of English easily enough to understand something from 200 years ago, but it's not quite the same as me. Jane Austen isn't exactly the same literature that someone would write in the 21st century, nor Shakespeare, certainly not. And yet, Latin is just one dialect. It's just one language that, with the deliberate conservatism about it to try to keep it from changing, which was used by all the authors that came after. So you can learn the same language that these people are writing in, and that's what's so unique. So translation, you can appreciate plenty, but things need to be retranslated then every century or so because of the, as you've said, these changing of the vernacular languages.
And also we learn more and more about the culture from that period, right? From the classical Latin period.
Oh, you get so much. It's so much more rewarding. And the poetry is truly untranslatable because poetry is, in one's native language, it has feeling and rhythm. And you can, for example, if I learned Polish well enough, I could appreciate Polish poetry. Because I could experience a community of Polish speakers and how you normally speak together. And then I could, and then when I feel the poetry spoken, I could then be moved by it the same way that you as a native speaker can be moved by it. Translation doesn't have that power because the rhythms are different, the sounds are different. Poetry is a kind of music, so it just doesn't. It's something is lost. Is it better to read it in translation than nothing? Yeah, but it's not as good as the original, not even by a long shot.
Yeah, definitely. And from what I've heard, there is lots of literature that has not been translated to any language, right? Any modern language. So.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it's above 90%, hasn't even been attempted to be translated. Yeah. So that's the sum of so much human knowledge from so many centuries, from basically a millennium, all written in just one language, and obviously principally on the European continent. I think that makes it pretty valuable. So, and then the other part, now this is the part that really draws me in, is this community of wonderful people who have become my best friends, who speak Latin or want to speak Latin, and so people get together, and just the effort of doing so, because why do we have, reason we get along with the people we get along with. We could like the same football team. We could like the Lord of the Rings. We could just have something in common that we like. And if you find yourself continuously, into doing this thing that is the activity of trying to read Latin or even trying to speak Latin, if you find someone who's gone through all of those trials, all of those similar experiences, even if you're totally different people, And without this Latin connection, you might never be friends. Suddenly you realize, wow, we can enjoy all these things together. And that's really what it is for me. Plenty of people might be able to enjoy Latin entirely on their own, and I do very much enjoy reading what I read on my own. But being able to share it with other people, to laugh about it, to be moved by it, is a collective experience that people go through with, again, their football teams or their books that they like, or movies, TV shows that they enjoy. And it's that kind of connection, that it's a connection to other people who do speak the language. And ultimately, then the last part is, why bother speaking it? Okay, there's people who speak Latin, and they don't even believe that, oh, they speak Latin. Yeah, we do. But why even bother? And the reason is that if I wanted to, again, use the example with Polish, imagine, Norbert, if I could only learn Polish grammar and just barely enough vocabulary to get by, you gave me a poem written by one of your most famous poets, and I translated it. I would not be appreciating the work, or even if it were prose text written by someone, I wouldn't be able to appreciate it in the same way, because the sounds would be so different. I would be basically using English. I wouldn't really be learning Polish. I'd be learning about Polish enough to comprehend it in a filtered way. And the other part, too, is if I were and also think, how hard would that be? You give me a poem which is just maybe not that hard to understand because it has basic vocabulary, but if I'm looking up every other word, it is hard for me. If instead I learned to speak Polish, then I could actually read the thing as if it's a language I actually know. So most people do want to access Latin and ancient Greek literature, just they want to read it. But to read best, one has to be able to speak to some degree, maybe not fluently, but to be able to think a little bit in Latin, to feel. That's the big part, to feel in Latin. Then you can truly appreciate what you read. That's why.
Yeah, absolutely. So this direct experience, it's a completely different thing than just translating, definitely. But you mentioned something very important, the social aspect of language, Yes, you can learn it by yourself, but it wouldn't have survived so long. Latin wouldn't have survived so long if it hadn't been for the community, right? Like, because it needs to be passed over to new people, and it's crucial, really. But I have a lot of experiences with my students who are learning Polish, and I do focus more on a social aspect of language learning. There are different schools, different approaches to language teaching and learning, but with me it's more social. Like, it's all based on conversation, and it's just incredible when I hear people speaking to me in Polish, because we are having a conversation, and they make a lot of mistakes and everything, but because I hear Polish, I can connect better with those people still, because it's not even about them attempting to speak. It's just like this sound of Polish, gets to me, and I understand them better. So definitely you can connect with someone when you actually speak the language.
So your methods are
better.
I'm sorry. Yeah, your methods are based a lot on conversation, on being able to gain the ability to speak. I don't know if you have, because maybe this is just a thought experiment, but have you met someone who's only learned Polish or principally learned Polish through just translation? Maybe they had some boring classes or boring books, and they didn't really learn the normal speaking things that you teach. And did you find that their comprehension of the language was considerably lower because of their method?
I don't think I've met anyone specifically who would be just doing the research themselves. Like, a majority of people who come to me, they want to speak. They are in that mindset, Obviously, like, if we start working together, we need to be on the same page, and but many of them have actually very good understanding of Polish, but they have difficulty speaking. That's why they come to me to start activating the language skills. And actually, after that, they understand Polish even better. After
Absolutely.
many hours of just trying to make themselves understood.
Yeah.
We also work with like this authentic content, a lot of audio, so they get exposure to just natural way of speaking. But you know, it's not that easy to get to a very high level of proficiency in speaking. I think that it takes a lot of effort. Even someone in the comments asked, like, how many hours did you spend on learning Latin, or what's your routine?
Those are good questions.
Because you know, I mean, on one hand, it's okay, it's difficult, right? But on the other hand, it's possible. But maybe your goal is not to be 100% proficient. You know, it really depends on your personal goals. But with Latin, it's a bit different, you know, because you do feel kind of, I can tell that you feel kind of responsibility for reconstructing the language correctly, you know, to be true to how it really sounded. But at the same time, you want to speak it, and you make mistakes, you know, and everybody who's learning, they make mistakes, they struggle. But they still put effort into it. So I wonder what's your approach to that, you know, to this like perfectionism maybe in language learning, especially in terms of Latin?
That's a really good question. Yeah. Well, we have an expression in English that the perfect is the enemy of the good. Actually, I think it's a translation of an Italian poet. Now that I think about it, but yeah, the perfect is the enemy of the good. If I'm only supposed to start speaking again, if I'm using Polish, if I'm trying, then before I have to learn all the grammar and all the vocabulary for conversation before I start speaking. Well, that's almost an infinite amount of time to perfect something before I get into active usage. And you know that your students trying to use the language, making mistakes, is their way to learn. Now with Latin, it's so different because we have this change that's occurring where we have currently still the majority of Latin education, I would say, in the world, though I don't have statistics, is taught through what's called grammar translation, where you learn the grammar in your native language. In my case, in the U.S., it would be in English, and then you translate stuff into English, and that's all you do. This is no longer nearly so prevalent as it was, although in Italy that is still, ironically perhaps, the most prevalent way to access Latin, because many Italians, especially if they're in Liceo Classico, which is where they do the classical high school, or even Liceo Scientifico, the scientific school, they're learning at least a bit of Latin. And that's all the way they access it, just sort of a kind of familiarity of the grammar and a tiny bit of vocabulary, and very little of actually, learning the language, and certainly not to speak it. So this revolution that's happening all around the world now, thanks entirely to the internet and the enthusiasts out there who encourage me to start doing what I'm doing, to follow in their footsteps. And now other people, I'm just so excited, are also trying to learn to speak Latin because of the videos that I've put up. That's great. But then you have a teacher who's been teaching Latin. Let's say she's been teaching Latin for 20 years. And now she's like, I see the value of this. She says, all right, I'm American. I only know English. Maybe I studied a bit of Spanish and French, but I can't speak either one. But I know Latin really well. That is, I can read it in this way, but maybe I don't know it as well as I did. And then she has to confront this reality of, well, wait a minute. Now, I thought I knew this language. I've been teaching it for 2 decades. But I don't know how to speak it, and now I realize this is important. So then the individual, in this case, this teacher I'm thinking about, no one in particular. Could be anyone in the world, because I know this has happened thousands of times around the world in the past couple, decades for sure. They think about, wait a minute, I thought I knew this thing, and now other people are saying I don't know it unless I speak it, and I agree with them. But if I do agree with them, that I don't know what I'm doing. So there's this horrible conflict where they realize, well, wait a minute, I have to start doing this, start to speak it. I have to completely change my method. So they actually have a much, much, much harder time than someone who starts learning Latin from the start in a spoken conversational way, in a more direct way, which is based on reading and speaking instead of just translation. Because those people, they don't have to undo bad habits, whereas people have been teaching for years. I've had some of them as wonderful students too, but I know how much they struggle because their brain has been trained for years to translate into English, or whatever their native language is, and then they have to try to convert this into to try to turn that off completely and stay entirely in the language. Well, you're a polyglot yourself, Norbert, so you don't probably you may not have experienced this the way that other people have, and I never have been in that position either, because I was always learning Latin with the goal of wanting to speak it. But it's a real problem. That means you have a large community of wonderful teachers who are out there who are trying to, like, well, I want to speak Latin in my classroom, they say. But how on earth do I do that if I don't even know how to say hello, how are you? Mm-hmm. Even if they have something like the wonderful Familia Romana, that book is designed to teach you to read. But if you want to run your Latin classroom like it's the Spanish classroom just down the hall in your high school, well, how do you do that if you don't know the basic greetings? Because there are relatively few textbooks that teach it, and Familia Romana is not one of them. And that's exactly why I started the video series that you've seen me publish now weekly the past few weeks, Lingua Latina Comprehensibilis, which is based on the progression of the grammar and vocabulary in that wonderful book, Familia Romana, but with a conversational turn. So hopefully that will help a lot of teachers out there who are in that position, who want to be able to say, hello, how are you? Who is your, and start to interact with their students that way. And there are many brilliant teachers out there who have been able on their own to figure that out and do great at it, and to take advantage of our community and the resources out there to do all those things without my videos. I'm just sort of that's one of the reasons I am making them, though, so people can actually see some examples they could use in the classroom if they like to do so, as well as for people who want to start from absolute zero and just watch the videos and learn to speak Latin. I forget what the question was, but I got off on some tangents.
Yeah, actually, from what you're saying, I think that you could maybe tell us a little bit more about your experience learning modern languages, because you said that you learned German and Italian in high school, right? And then
German and a little bit of Italian in high school, and more in Italy, in Florence, Italy, when I was in college.
Yeah. So you had this experience of learning modern languages first, and then you switched to, first Elvish, right? You started looking into Elvish.
I was dabbled by looking at a bit of Elvish grammar, because it was like, ooh, there's poetry in Elvish in the books, and I was like, oh, I want to understand this.
Yeah, but then you went directly from there to Latin. So I wonder, like, how was that experience? Like, so you've been doing it in high school using the modern methodologies, I suppose, I don't know. And then you started developing interest into Latin. So what was different? Like, did you notice any differences, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, and it's about access to material and speakers, the actual materials and speakers. Because I learned German in high school, and I was conversationally fluent when I left high school. I barely have used German since then, so my German is quite poor now, though I can still get along in very basic conversation and read some things. But I learned in a natural method, the way that most high school classes are taught, in a modern foreign language. And then in college, I took French and Italian, and that was fun. I did that at the same time. That was kind of crazy. But then I went to Italy, and I learned Italy very fluently there. Well, I've gotten, it's a complete immersion experience. So compared to the German, was quite better. So that just is what learning a language was to me, and I think that is
okay. So maybe before you move to the Latin part, like, because you said you just mentioned that those languages were taught in a modern way, but especially on the internet, there's a lot of criticism about modern methodologies of language learning. Like, you cannot learn language at school. Like, there is a lot of conversations happening around that.
You can't learn language at school? Could you tell me more about this?
Yeah, like, many people say, like, the counter arguments are very similar to what we criticize Latin lessons for. Focus on grammar, on testing. There is not enough exposure to the language, and there is a lot of focus on correcting and this trying to get people to be 100% correct all the time, and the focus is not on speaking, but on actually passing the exams and stuff like that. But maybe your experience was different in high school.
Cool. Quite.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite different. I'd say that my wonderful German teachers in high school, they absolutely were focused on what you and I would prefer to do in our classrooms, which is whether virtual classroom or a physical classroom, which is to try to teach through with if you have enough time. You can teach, give this exposure because it's always about time. Someone was asking about how many hours. Counting them would be difficult. But I can give you like months and how much time I spent per day, I suppose, in different periods of my life. But when it comes to German, for example, I wanted to take German also because I knew there was a foreign exchange program in the junior year of high school. So I wanted to. So I had a different motivation too, like, oh, I want to, enjoy this experience more by knowing the language that much better. So I would probably spend more effort on my homework. And I got into Mozart in high school, so I liked listening to like Die Zauberflöte and other German operas, a little bit of Wagner, and I like music, so it was I was getting this expansions because I can enjoy, musicals or theater in English. But then if I can do it in German, then it's like, oh, now I have this, yet there's so much more that I can have access to now. So I was enjoying experiencing that. So with something, if one is learning, I think, anything, and it's limited to the 3 days a week someone gets to meet their teacher in a high school classroom, is that enough to learn anything? Well, probably not. Probably you have to spend not just your time even on your homework assignments, but have ways to get into it. Music, for example, being one that I like a lot, that go beyond that. So it becomes sort of a way of life where you, maybe that's extreme, not a way of life, but it becomes part of your life. Something that you do as much as you eat or exercise or whatever you like to do. It's not just this thing that, oh, if I take this class, the hours in the classroom should give me this ability. I don't think that's going to happen unless you're in a true immersion program where you're, or like in a boarding school, and they have some of these that exist even for Latin, where you're in the foreign country. Well, then you have no choice. But otherwise, it's up to you. If you're in not the country, if your students are learning Polish, if they're not in Poland and they aren't surrounded by Polish people and they don't have a Polish spouse or friend or family member, then they must go the extra mile. I think that's a big part of it. And I did. I went to Italy, lived there, lived with a family, and that was immensely successful and so enjoyable. And ditto for my German experience, getting to go to Germany, live with a German family.
Yeah. So as you said, like school was there just to kind of give you a little bit of structure, but it's up to you, right? Like, but it's so. Like with anything else, not only languages, but other subjects as well. If you really want to learn something, you need to put extra effort, outside of classes. It's just there to kind of indicate that this exists. Like you can learn about this, you can learn about that, but eventually it's up to you.
Yeah, like again, to be my teacher for the little bit of Polish I know has been Jan Oko, who's wonderful. But he knows that I haven't had the time to meet him to continue my lessons because I'm honest with myself. I know that right now I have to spend so much time making videos with Latin, improving my ancient Greek, that as much as I would love to go to Poland tomorrow, that's not going to happen for the obvious reason of the condition of international travel anyway. So I'm putting it aside. So instead of doing a little bit of Polish now, I don't think it's time for me to do that. I think but because then when I get the time, I know how to fill my life with it, label everything in my office here in Polish, for example. So I know what the computer is, the bookshelf, the microphone. Actually, most of those are maybe similar. I don't know. Microphone, is that it?
Microphone, computer, yeah.
Oh, good. Well, hey, look at that.
You're already learning, yeah. Yeah, definitely, because language learning is a commitment, like you cannot learn it just like that. Like you really need to put effort and you need to commit to it, and it's a long-term process. So you need to pick your languages wisely as well. Like you need to really feel some sort of connection or motivation to learn them, because without that you won't last.
Yeah, if it's not English, which is obviously the international language of most communication, once one learns English, well, then you have the opportunity to choose the kind of thing you want to learn next. Because you can
Mm-hmm.
get by if you have English in the world today, which is why we native speakers of English in U.S., U.K., Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, we um, d- it's much harder for us to be motivated to learn another language. I think people who are not native speakers of English are much more advantaged for that reason. Although they have to do more work because they have to learn English first, at least they have learned another language to some degree of competency or fluency. And so they have a skill set of, oh, I know what learning a language is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can actually apply that to something else like Latin. So yeah, my way of learning or being taught German and Italian was conversation based. It was not overly focused on correction. And you mentioned that, which is interesting, because getting into this community of because Latin is just such a specific idiom. So if people are making mistakes, there is not an incorrect temptation to be like, we shouldn't say that particular phrase because it's not something that's in Latin. It's something we made up recently, and we just don't need to say that particular phrase or whatever it is. And I can give you examples, but they're not important. Whereas if it's interesting with the modern language too, because in the settings of ancient Greek and Latin, I've noticed that people who come from especially Northern European background, like their teachers from Northern Europe, they might have a reputation for being heavy on the correction happy,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's ancient Greek or Latin. Whereas, and me, I could say probably if they're from the UK, France, or Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, just generally, I've made that observation, and that's not a statistical observation by any stretch. Whereas people from Southern Europe, Spain, Italy, and also the United States, where the reputation of Americans is being less strict about things than people in England, I think that transfers even to our and the way that generally you would expect Americans to be teaching whatever foreign language. Not as interested in heavy correction, more interested in the cultivation. And these are huge exaggerations, as you can find opposite examples in any of these countries I mentioned, for sure. And I know the opposite
Mm-hmm.
examples too, so forgive my generalization. And I don't know what it's like in Poland. You'd have to tell me. Did you find your English classes, they were correction happy, or were they more modern like you're talking about?
Well, like it was more focused on just passing the exams, you know. Like you have to learn how to pass the exam because that's what matters most, you know, to get good grades. Yeah, it's in a public school and its function is to prepare you for university, right? So you really have to pass those exams. There is no other way. So it's up to you how you're going to learn English. So I remember when I signed up for like a private English school, but it was all preparing you for passing the exam. And you know, I didn't know better at that time, but it helped me pass my exams well, and I was able to start using English later, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's totally wrong approach. You know, if your goal is to pass the exam because it opens doors to new opportunities, like just do it. You know, maybe that's the right choice for you. So yeah, like in Poland, English classes are focused on that, and usually they have the reputation of not being of the highest quality. But if you have like so many students in one classroom, you have only like a limited time, right? There's so many factors there, you know, that I wouldn't judge it so harshly these days. Like when I was a student, I was like judging it a lot, but now when I look back at it, I think that again, it's up to you. Like you have this resource. The school is giving you some resources, you know, and it's up to you to use it. And the sooner you learn it, the better, because school will not teach you anything. Like it's just creating the environment for you, but it's up to you to take advantage of it.
Sure is.
Right.
You can have an exercise plan, but if you don't do it, you're not going to
Yeah, or you can even
get
go to a
there.
school that has great methodology and everything, but it comes down to you. Like, how are you going to use it? You know.
Right. Did you learn any other languages in high school or after that were
Uh,
not in like in school? I mean, yeah.
in a school environment, I did Hungarian studies, so I was learning Hungarian at
That's
university. But because it was a university course and the major was in Hungarian, so it was very heavy on grammar exams as well.
really that's interesting.
Uh,
I
but
wouldn't have expected that.
but we have so many hours of Hungarian that uh, you just live and breathe Hungarian, you know, all the
Right.
time
So
when you study it at university. It's a completely different experience than in high school, because when you're choosing it as your major, like from the very beginning, like they just bombarding you with Hungarian, and you go back home and you prepare for those tests, and actually it worked really well. But I think the intensity of it's what did it. You know, maybe the methodologies were not always great, but the intensity, and you've been focused on it so much, and I also developed passion for it. So, you know, I would spend hours and hours, like 6 hours a day, or studying Hungarian, like before classes. Then you have 3 hours of classes, and
That sounds like a kind of paradise to me. I'd love to be studying Hungarian that much. I'd love to have such availability in my life to do such a thing now.
but now looking back at it, I also think that we could have spent that time way better. You know, like
More speaking, you think?
more
auditory
speaking,
input.
more auditory input. Absolutely, you know, we just
Were you
had
finding speaking and auditory input experiences on your own to increase your understanding, or not?
a
Were you
little
going the
bit,
extra
but
mile?
that was the issue. You know, we had some textbooks that we were following, and the stories in those textbooks are not that exciting. You know.
I hate
So I was missing this authentic content, you know. I think that teachers were focused more on just teaching what we were supposed to know for the exam, and just going over the textbook, instead of like giving us like real examples of dialogues, you know, or there is so much media now on the internet, you know. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's crazy. It's so much. Like even I remember Russian is a language I've always been trying to learn, and my knowledge is still quite limited. And that's partly the age of the internet when I was looking for things. Now there's so much more. I mean, Amazon has a wonderful television program, Sophia, which is all in Russian, made in Russia. So I can listen to that now, and it's wonderful. So there's a lot more that's out there, which is so readily accessed, which that authenticity that you're saying, and interesting material too. And that's why I've gotten into what I'm doing, to try to make a few interesting things, knowing full well that my little self cannot possibly fill the need for content for even if it's just ancient poetry or literature that's being recited on YouTube. I've done some of that, but I've had some friends who started doing it, and thank goodness, because there needs to be more than just me, and of course there's way more than just me, that's why I'm doing it too, because there is this community of other people out there who are making these wonderful videos, like Jesse Kraft and Daniel Pedersen, who are doing this great content, which is in Latin, and expanding that. But how many videos there are in Latin, there are probably a million more in Polish alone. Right?
Yeah, or Hungarian. But again, when I was at university, it was around that, like 2008, you know, so the internet was still not full of content like today, you know. So, but I think that what would be better for these university courses is to have at least some classes devoted to this comprehensible input, you know. When you have this group, you talk to them only in Hungarian, let's say. But I think my teachers were a little bit too concerned with us understanding everything, and they had to translate everything. They had to like make sure that we understand the list of words, or we would just do the translation rounds where we have like a word, a sentence, and this student needs to translate it, another one. Just like this very boring activity, you know. But my favorite class was descriptive grammar of Hungarian, because that one was 100% in Hungarian, and the exam was all in Hungarian. So from the very beginning, we had like this Hungarian specialist, you know, teaching us about Hungarian grammar, using the terminology. It was very, you know, specialized knowledge. But because it was 100% in Hungarian and we were supposed to respond in Hungarian, I understood maybe 80%, 85%, you know, but it was great. I felt I've made some progress, you know, like, wow, like I'm able to participate in this conversation, or just listening to the teacher. And it really kept me motivated to go back home, review everything. So next time when I'm in class, I'm actually, and I understand more, you know.
That's right.
And I think more of this should be happening. But one more thing, because it was all in Hungarian, it was the third year. Again, the teacher was very relaxed, and she didn't expect us to be correct when we speak. She just wanted us to speak, you know?
Yeah.
So she didn't even give too much corrections, because we were talking about this descriptive grammar or Hungarian. That was the focus. Like, you need to get that right. You don't need to get all the sentences right when you speak. You know, it was more about
if you use the accusative instead of the dative case. Whatever, you know, I understood you as the teacher might. You know?
I mean, So we felt more relaxed, and we were able to enjoy those lectures more.
Well, when it comes to this debate, if you will, or this dichotomy between teaching methods, I guess unfortunately, heavy experiences you have, which were heavily on the grammar translation kind of thing. Even in a modern language classroom, which is quite shocking to hear, though I understand that can happen, as opposed to the more immersive environment. I think it comes down to fear and comfort as opposed to confidence and enjoyment. Mm-hmm. And those are the two sides, because the teacher could be afraid, if I only speak in Hungarian, the students aren't going to understand what I'm saying. To a degree, that will be true, and it will be true at first. And also comfort. I mean, I have that with my own students. I'm delighted to talk at them in Latin as much as I want, but I have to measure their comfort levels and what they're prepared for. They may not be prepared for only Latin all the time, although I'd be delighted. I know I'm going to lose someone to a point which isn't acceptable, so I include some English, depending on the type of class, the speed of the class, mm-hmm. what time we have available. So there's all sorts of factors there. But on the other side, like you're saying, you got to have that immersion course. You got to gain the confidence from trying, failing, and then eventually succeeding, and then the enjoyment as a result. And that's the transition that mm-hmm. Any language teaching experience needs to move towards, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we still need that grammar explained, and we need to understand that, you know. So I'm not like completely against that, because you need to understand the language, like because I've got so many experiences learning different languages. Now you just give me whatever language, and when I read about grammar, or someone is teaching me about grammar, I understand what they're talking about, you know. But right. In high school, I didn't even know what a grammatical case was. Even in my language, we have 7, right? I had no idea. And we had like German class as well. It wasn't that intense, once a week, but I just couldn't figure out, like, so what is this case again? Like, why does this article change? Like, I couldn't understand it, you know. And only when I started learning Hungarian, and Hungarian is very regular. It has like tons of cases, like way more, but it's super regular, and it's an agglutinative language. So it's the best language to learn about grammar, like what actually grammar is.
I agree.
You know,
Yes,
what grammatical information is, because or grammatical meaning. You have this kind of semantic meaning, right, where it refers to something specific, and then you have grammatical meaning that is like a different level.
Well, it's fascinating to hear because, of course, as a native Polish speaker, you live cases. Every day you speak Polish, whereas I, as an English speaker, barely at all, except for I and me and my, and that's about it. And that is really interesting. Of course, that was true for me as well. I didn't know anything about the case system until I started learning German. And then I got that once you learn about it in an intellectual way, you can then intuitively appreciate it and say Latin or Elvish.
Yeah, but in your case, because you're an English native speaker, like the cases had to be explained to you on a deeper level. But because Polish people speak with cases, everybody assumes that we know what cases are. So even in elementary school, we had to remember like the names of the cases, the questions they answer, you know, but that's it. Like to us, that's what a case is. The case answers a question, like kogo, czego, komu, czemu, you know. So this is not a good understanding of what case is. You know, it's just I'm able to answer that question, which means that I get the case right. But it's my native speaker's intuition, you know, telling me that I don't understand the structure, like how it connects. Like the case, you know, doesn't exist without any context. You have to have context for a case to make sense.
That's very interesting. I find it true also that most speak whatever their native language is, particularly with English, they only finally learn, I understand English grammar now because I took German or Spanish or Latin, because they had something to compare it against. So that was obviously true for you as well. That's pretty cool. I had one thing to add, which wasn't directly related to what we were talking about, because there are, and they're just on pronunciation, there are a lot of people out there, particularly Italians, but also people who are exposed to Latin through their experience with the Catholic Church, who might have commented or said, my pronunciation is wrong or something. I wanted to also say that what I like to do, and what the majority of people use, is the restored classical pronunciation of Latin, which would say gena and gemma instead of cena and gemma. But I wanted to make the comment, and in no way is incorrect to use that ecclesiastical pronunciation, to use the traditional pronunciation of Italy. There's also a Polish traditional one too, which is very beautiful. And Katarzyna Ochman, another Polish Latin-speaking friend, she uses the traditional Polish one, and it sounds fantastic. And I can understand it. It doesn't take that long to get used to it. It's a little bit like the German pronunciation of Latin, which is used in pieces like Karl Orff's Carmina Burana, if people have heard that musical piece, and other works. So I just want to make sure people know that there's a plurality of conventions out there and traditions. And while I'm interested in an historical reconstruction, which happens to be quite current and quite popular, everybody in Italy who prefers to use that ecclesiastical pronunciation should continue to feel that comfortable doing so. If you can enjoy the literature, if you're getting something out of it, don't worry. Not only will I be able to understand you when you end up learning Latin to speak it to me, I'm going to be able to use that pronunciation too, because it's not that hard to pick up. In fact, I encourage every Latin learner and speaker to learn to recite in both, just so you are comfortable, because it's like getting British people and US people together. They'll converse together, they'll have a conversation, and there might be some small misunderstanding, but it's easily rectified. It's the same case with Latin speakers who use ecclesiastical pronunciation or classical pronunciation. So I want everybody to know that what I use is one way, and that those other ways that exist, namely the ecclesiastical, is absolutely fine.
Yeah, so you would say that all those communities speaking different kinds of Latin, they meet, they interact with each other,
all the time.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about this Latin-speaking world and community. Like, how does it work? And maybe how did you uh, did you join the community that already existed, or you also like build your own?
I'm part of something that's growing rapidly, and so yes and yes at different stages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a lot of answers to that question, so let me see if I can keep them all in my head. So when I started in 2005, there was things that existed like the Finnish news. YLE had a Latin program every week, just a 5-minute program, which stopped a couple of years ago. They've just lost the funding, and they went for like 30 years. It was great. The reality is they're not perhaps needed anymore. I do think it's a shame that the YLE station doesn't want to fund them anymore, because what they were doing was somewhat unique. Beautifully translated into, not translated Latin, they were writing their own original Latin news based on the world news summary, like what's happening in whatever country, what events, all of those things were in Latin, and they're fantastic examples of written Latin in a proper news style. But there's so much more content which started to evolve. I guess they aren't as necessary anymore. But that said, that's mostly what existed back in 2005. And then I got interested in the years that followed to want to make my own YouTube channel, and I did around 2007 when ScorpioMartianus started. And then I started to try to do, because it was so funny, the only thing that existed was the news. So I was like, yeah, I want to do the news, but do video news.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did.
I saw a few episodes.
with my soul patch?
Yeah.
Yeah, from 2009. That was, I wanted to do something that was ephemeral, something that existed, that was really just good for the day, because if Latin can be so rapidly made and also seen and then discarded again, like we throw away the newspaper, then that means it's a really living, vital thing that's in our world and not just something ancient. It is, however, a lot of work to do that, so I could never maintain that.
Immediately when I saw that series on your channel, the news series, and I realized like this is so much work, because news has to be very quickly done, right? Like you have to do the news when it's happening.
That's what I did. When one day I would wake up in the morning early, I would read the news stories of the day. I was watching the news, reading the news a lot back then, not as much anymore. And then I would translate. No, I wouldn't translate. I would summarize. I would write my own original short paragraph summaries based on what I had read and who was, reporting it or wherever. And then make the video, produce the video, edit the video, all by the early afternoon. And so like a 6-hour super intense process, or 8 hours potentially. And that's not sustainable. But I think what I really want to achieve with my YouTube channel, as far as growing a community in that sense, is copycats in a way. And whether it's the news or doing songs that are with good translations into Latin and that are performed as well. All the different things I've experimented with and have had a lot of fun doing. I love to see more content out there, so that although there are other YouTube channels that are in Latin, they're wonderful, and I love every video that these friends and colleagues of mine make. I want to see more of that. I want to see more people doing that. So kind of I won't have to. I kind of want to. I love all the things I've played with, but will I do the news again? Probably not. I would love some people to set up, because it would probably require collaboration of 2 or 3 people to make that happen, and I'll help people too if they want to give them some tips just to get them started and how to do it. But I'd love that to exist so I can enjoy it. And then it increases this breadth of our community, because that's a big way that it can increase this creation of especially video, audiovisual content for everybody to enjoy. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, so after I got to go to Lexington, Kentucky for the Conventiculum Lexingtoniense in 2009, I felt like after that 4-year track, achieved my goal of going from no Latin or almost no Latin to conversational fluency. So, and basic fluency, not, really good fluency, but it was good enough to feel like I really know this language. And then I went into the military, and I just got distracted by everything I was doing in that training, my master's, as well as going to Japan, working there. I was stationed there in Tokyo for a few years. And so when I came back to it again a couple years ago, this whole community in that 8-year period had flourished and grown so much larger than it had by like 10 times. I don't know how many times, but it was so much bigger. So I felt like I was getting back on the river with everyone else, and there's all these other boats on the river. It's like, yeah, all right, let's paddle. It was great. That was why I don't think I'll ever leave it again. I didn't really leave it. I just got busy, and there wasn't that kind of community. Now, with how connected people are, the meetings that exist every week on Zoom for people to interact with that are in Latin and ancient Greek, it's so much more fun even than it was then because of the people. So, yeah. There we go. That's what I'd say to that.
Yeah. So your channel, ScorpioMartianus in particular, gathers all the people speaking Latin, right?
One of my videos, I was able to get a native speaker or a good fluent speaker from some 35 individuals, and I think almost it's about 30 languages were in that video from last week. Yeah, that was cool. But my channel, I have on occasion been able to show, like at Greco Latino Vivo, which was in Italy, and they're in cities all around Italy, but principally in Florence, and run by Giampiero Marchi. And I was invited there to give a talk on some of my research, which was a lot of fun because I got to meet a lot of these people that I knew only through the internet before. We were all in that same place, and it was so cool and exciting to kind of meet my heroes, and to be to just do that. It was fantastic. So that's when you get into this Latin-speaking community, if any of you out there do, you'll find that there is a huge amount of support. So many people who are starting out just like you, and who want to try this out. And this is what's so great. I do have a video about this on Polymathy where I talk about the culture of Latin speakers. And what you'll find is that there is a whole lovely, enjoyable world of people that you're going to be able to be with. They're going to be beginners, intermediate, advanced, and there's such a huge range of experiences you can go to. This is not something that is only that you may experience it merely on your own if you wish, but if you like to hang out with people who are also interested in this language, you're going to be able to, and it's going to be exciting and fun.
Absolutely. So you just mentioned that you would like to see more content in Latin so you can enjoy it, right? Because obviously, because now you do feel a little bit responsible to create this content, right? Because it's
for sure, and not just me. I'm not certainly not the only YouTube channel out there who's making stuff in Latin, and everybody's contribution is absolutely vital, no matter how rarely they put up a video, how short it is, or whatever subject. Its very existence is necessary, and I'm so glad that people out there are doing what they're doing. But yeah, I want to see a lot more, and I bet because there's people out there who are frankly better at everything that I'm trying to do. I happen to have a little bit of experience in making videos and I have a microphone. I can do enough. But I know, because I've seen the professional stuff that's out there that exists for not only other languages, but for whatever content. When are we going to be able to get some full-length cinematography or animated series in Latin with voice actors and all that? There's no reason. The talent exists now. The technology exists now. We just have to get the people together, and that's mostly a question of time and money. There will be a critical mass, I think, Norbert, where eventually this does occur, and it's going to be exciting to be part of it when it does occur.
Yeah, definitely. Because even in terms of modern languages, we also have so much content these days that it's even too much. If you're just a learner, you go on the internet just to look for interesting content, and you cannot find it because, especially if you're not that fluent or you're just a beginner or you don't know what's available, it's very difficult to navigate this amount of content. So hopefully you will get to that stage with Latin.
That's a good problem.
That you will actually have to have channels that curate content for you and discuss what's going on in the Latin speaking world. There is a lot of commentary channels that talk about different things that are happening because we're just not able to follow everything, all the content. Yeah, and actually that's what I'm doing with my students. I also start
Tell me more
seeing,
about it.
I see that when I'm the idea of a teacher these days has really changed, and I think that my job is to curate content for my students, so it's on their level. It's something interesting, something that compelling for them enough to actually work with it and adapting it to their needs, because just teaching and lecturing is not working anymore, because you can get it. There is so many videos explaining grammar to you, or very good textbooks, but we have a lot of content available online, but we can't access it because we don't know what's good, what's not good.
So what's the solution?
We need someone. We need someone. So I think like these days, like when you are a teacher, your job should be like finding interesting content, because you as a native speaker or someone who is proficient in the language can find interesting content, something worth watching, and also short enough for a student to consume and be able to handle it. So that's what I think. We should be focusing more on providing that exposure to the language and opening eyes of our students to different channels or different media that is providing content in the language you want to learn. But in your case, it's way different, because obviously there is not that much content in Latin, and it's not that diverse yet.
No, it's not.
You just keep doing one thing, one format, because you're good at it, and I cannot blame you, because you are in a different position here.
Right, and I've played around with different kinds of videos and formats and content, the news, of course, as well as general vlogs and music videos, and now doing true from the beginning, a principio, ab initio, from the beginning, pedagogy, the Lingua Latina Comprehensibilis. And I think I decided that's what I need to do right now, and I'll focus on that, because once I make that program and it's more or less complete, which will probably take a year, then everybody can build off of that. They can do something better. I'm just doing what I can do here in my office. And then from there, other people will be able to expand and do more. So that's what's really exciting. And that's the other part too, which I found so enjoyable to do in my in the second video of that series, where I was able to get the generous contributions of these greetings, hello, how are you, in 30-some languages, because I know the diversity that's out there. Now, there is a huge number of English speakers and German speakers, just to name a couple, a lot of people who speak Latin in the U.S., and but there are so many more in every European country. I know they exist. I've met them, and so to show a large number of them in Europe is, I think, maybe it's a kind of a wake-up call in a way to people like, oh, not only is this a language that I can learn, but this is a language that, maybe people could see someone from, I don't know, the Netherlands and say, hey, I'm from the Netherlands. Well, if he speaks Latin, maybe I can too. But not only that, from China and Japan, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand, all these parts, South Africa, it's fantastic. So it's it definitely, obviously, it's rooted in Europe, but it was always a language after the Romans started conquering their neighbors and started incorporating them into their republic. Most famously the Greeks especially, but not just them. It became a language of many nations altogether. And I think that is the lovely part about its ancient history, the really lovely part that we can echo today, that it's something anybody can be a part of. And all this diversity of content, I'm reminded of the famous quote of, I think, Michelangelo, right, where he says, I don't sculpt the statue. I can already see it inside the marble. I just have to chip away the extra bits. I believe he said something like that. I can see this massive potential. The people who already know Latin, that with joined forces or whatever funding is necessary, equipment, that soon we could have incredible content. And then we have not an arms race. We have the friendly competition of different groups trying to like, okay, I see what they did. Let's do something like that a little bit better, and then it just gets better and better and better. That's what I see the next 10 years.
Yeah, because I think that the main problem that there is not so much content in Latin on the internet is that being a YouTube creator is a different skill set than, you know, being a Latinist and being able to speak Latin, you know.
That's true.
You know, you need to learn how to make content, because just posting content, whatever, it doesn't really work that well. It's not good. The algorithm might not be picked up by the algorithm. It won't be recommended to people interested in that. You know, so
you have to advertise yourself all the time, which is a full-time job in its own sake.
You need marketing skills and everything. So I really think that because of that, a lot of creative people in the Latin-speaking community, they are put off by that idea of making content.
And very many of them are teachers. They're fantastic teachers, but they have full-time teaching schedules.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah. So I think maybe the solution could be like creating like a media, I don't know, company, or just like an organization that is just helping those creative people from Latin-speaking world to create their series or the kind of content, but it all goes towards like one channel, you know, or one network.
Yeah,
that everybody's helping each other to create the best possible content, you know.
That's right.
So people don't waste their time making like content that is not that great, because if it's not that great, it's gonna be buried in the YouTube's algorithm. You know, nobody is going to find it. So you would need someone who could guide people in how.
Are you volunteering?
Well, I have my project going on. I have my ideas, you know, but you know, I definitely helping in the way that, you know, I'm trying to incorporate on my channel different communities speaking different languages, you know, to show them that making content with those languages can be done and can be interesting and can be successessful as well.
The Sardinian one was so cool. I love that one. That was great.
Yes. So actually, my format is very. It's kind of a proven format so far, you know, because.
Clearly, congratulations again. Silver YouTube play button. Well done.
Yeah, thank you so much. But you know, it's taken.
Where is it? I expect it to be in the background. It's not there.
Maybe next time. But the thing is that I've been doing it for maybe 6 years. But I was also discouraged at the beginning, because I posted a video, like it wasn't of great quality, but I was trying to do something, you know, just putting my time in, but I wasn't that committed to my channel. And only when I started being serious about it, analyzing data and learning more about YouTube, then it started working. Like I've noticed that from all of the formats that I put online, this mutual intelligibility has been most successful. So I decided to go into that more, you know, and started being more creative about evolving this. I also did like this comprehensible input Polish lessons and stuff like that, you know.
Huh. And that wasn't as interesting to people?
No, it was maybe, it wasn't that interesting, not to a lot of people. Some people liked it, but on YouTube, it wasn't enough for YouTube to actually start promoting it and positioning me.
I understand.
Because you need to know what your channel is about, and you need to be pretty consistent. You cannot just one day post Polish lesson, the other day post mutual intelligibility, experiment. it just doesn't work like
That's
that.
very good advice for me, because that's exactly the opposite of what I have deliberately sought to do, which is to demonstrate a variety of different things so that people know what they can see before their eyes what's possible, and then do something better. But I hear what you're saying.
Yes, I mean, but in your case, it's a different thing because the Latin speaking community is just so kind of small. Everybody knows each other, you know.
Yeah, we do.
So they will find you even without algorithm.
Yeah,
you know, through word of mouth, or you meet at the conference or something, or someone you know recommends you to them. But because of the possibilities that are available on the internet, you could reach more people potentially interested in Latin. And I really like that you started this series, the new series on your channel, because it's an entry level. Like you can just watch this video and you can get hooked and you can start actually learning Latin. And when I visit your channel and I see there is like so much content, maybe I'm not your target audience, obviously, because I'm not going to learn Latin, even though when I look what you're doing,
you will.
when I look at what you're doing, I was like, maybe I should just get into it, you know. But again, as I said before, it's a commitment.
It takes commitment. It is.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I'm not ready to commit to Latin like this, because I have some other projects on my mind. But if I could clone myself, you know, I would tell my clone to learn Latin.
Convenient. That would be very convenient. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, but we need to pick our languages like wisely. Like it cannot be just random, because but your new series on your channel really gives you that, it gets your imagination going, you know. You start imagining like, oh, it's possible, like I understand most of it.
I planned about 50 videos currently, about which will go over each aspect of getting to the point of understanding conversation. The series that I'm making is based on one called French in Action from 1987 by the great Pierre Capretz from Yale, as I recall. Passed away a few years ago, but the series is what I'm imitating. And I watched that series, and then I knew French. And there's a similar one in Spanish, and then I knew Spanish. So my hope is that just by people watching it, when all the 50 or so episodes are created over the course of the next year, someone could actually just sit down, watch them from beginning to end over the course of a few weeks, and then have basic auditory comprehension, which translates to written comprehension as a foundation. That's my hope. We'll see what happens, though.
Yeah. I mean, you still probably, if you want to learn from these as a learner, you still need to put an extra effort. Maybe take notes during watching these videos, you know, or develop some sort of routine. But you need to have something like you providing just to start, just to have a chance. And as I said, seeing you speaking Latin in that video really like inspires and shows what's possible.
And that gets to the question that we got asked earlier today about how many hours. And if you use a book like Familia Romana, then you can, in a matter of, I did it in 3 months, and that's very fast. It's meant to be like a year. But a year you can read a language fluently, and if you are saying everything you read out loud, you'll be able to converse in the language for sure, because just if you're reading because it's so excellently constructed, Norbert. I can't gush enough about how great this wonderful book by the great late Hans Orberg is. There's nothing that really holds a candle. There are some that approach it, but it's nothing quite as good, because I can give that promise. If you learn everything in that book, you will have the complete foundation of Latin. You can't say that about other textbooks for almost any other language. Because if you can, let me know. If there is such a book that for Polish, Jan Oko is writing one now, which is very good, but doesn't exist yet, right? You can't hand it to me and say, Luke, learn this, and then you know Polish. And I'll be like, well, this is what I'm going to do now. And there's also a similar problem with ancient Greek. There's stuff that's close, but I've had to cobble together like 3 or 4 books to get my current level of proficiency, and ditto for other languages too. So that challenge is annoying, I find. But this annoyance doesn't exist for Latin, and that's what I can tell everybody out there, that if you commit to trying to learn that everything in that book as well as you can, well, you will know Latin, full stop. So
is this book? What does this book consist of? Just reading and some grammatical notes, or how is it constructed?
It's a story. It's a story. It's like a novel, but it starts from very simple. It starts with the following. It has a map of the Roman Empire, and it says Roma in Italia est. Italia in Europa est. Obviously, my last video is modeled after that first chapter. And my successive videos are going to be modeled after those chapters as well, which is deliberate because so many people have the book. It's meant to be this audio-visual aid. But, again, you could also potentially use the videos that I'm making independently of it, because if you just want to learn how to listen, but if you want to learn to read, you use the book. The book, though, is a story about it's called Familia Romana. It's about a Roman family. There's the father Julius and the mother Aemilia, and then there's 3 little kids. And then one of the slaves escaped, and he tries to escape back to Greece, and he has stolen money. So you have this a very engaging story, which ends up providing all of the experiences necessary to learn everything, every bit of vocabulary, every grammatical construction in context with marginal notes. Like every chapter ends with a grammatical Latina section, a Latin grammar section, where they say, Norbertus nominativus est. Norberte vocativus est. It's vocative and
so you do need a little bit of knowledge about grammar, right, to understand.
It gives you that. It gives you that knowledge in sufficient context. And I'm hoping to recreate it in an audio-visual way in this current series that I'm making. Like you saw in the first video, Salve Juli, and then Julius says, Salve Luki. So you hear vocatives happen. And then when you get enough context of seeing nominative case, but it's always vocative case when they say hello or goodbye, then you start to realize, oh, they're changing it there. That's weird. And then you see the grammar section written in Latin. It says, Norbertus nominativus est, and then Norberte vocativus est. And with enough context, you get everything you need. So you don't actually need that and say English language explanation of what's going on. So that's why it's so magnificent, because although it does help to have a teacher to maybe make it more efficient, it is not necessary. And that's what's so cool about it. And that's so you can be just like your Hungarian class that was totally immersive. That's what this is. It's complete reading immersion. And if you're saying everything aloud in the best pronunciation you can, whatever convention you use is fine just to learn it, then you will have all the auditory input you need as well.
Yeah. So, well, that sounds a little bit difficult for beginners. If you just you probably you would like a little.
We're all beginners, my friend.
But you would need a little bit of experience learning a foreign language.
No, you don't.
Or you just sit there with a book
and you can read the Roman alphabet. You, as we are, as being Polish and American, we have the Roman alphabet. That's all you need. You need nothing else.
But is there any audio coming with it, or?
There's my recordings that are on YouTube. There's also an audio that one can purchase from, which was actually read by the author. His pronunciation wasn't the same kind as mine. But yeah, you can use the audio input, but you can make it yourself. If you have bad pronunciation, well, it's kind of whatever, because the goal is to read. If bad pronunciation, whatever that is, if you have some kind of an accent. But the pronunciation is also easily found by Googling such a thing. It's if one wants to get good at it. But if you were to read that book by pronouncing every letter with a Polish pronunciation, well, then you would sound pretty much just like the wonderful Katarzyna Ochman, who uses the Polish pronunciation of Latin, and she speaks fluently. So it'll be great. It'll just sound like someone who's fantastic. So, and that's or if you were to use an Italian and just pronounce every letter like Italian or like Spanish, then you get the traditional pronunciations of these countries. English is a little bit crazy because we don't have very phonetic spelling. But that's if one had it's very easy to just decide, okay, I'm going to just pronounce every letter some way. And if you do it consistently, then you will succeed. So yeah, really just the book itself with no other language experience. Yes, it is possible. Will it help you? Yeah. But is it necessary? No.
You know, I think if you're determined to learn something, you will. You definitely will. Like, I remember, like, my great grandma. There is this story in the family that at that time, you know, she couldn't go to school. So she learned how to read from the prayers book because she knew prayers, right? She knew how to pray, and she would just look at the text and just like try to combine what she was saying with the letters she saw. And that's how she learned how to read. And the prayers book was the only book she had, you know, she had access to. So I really think that it's possible. If you're really determined to learn something, you will find a way with the limited resources you have.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, so what's the name of the book again, so everybody can hear?
Familia Romana.
Yeah, and you all can find out more about it on Luke's channel, ScorpioMartianus or Polymathy, right? Like, do you talk about this book on both channels?
I do. I have a video on each, one in Latin, one in English, where I actually show the books and I explain the books in the series, how they're used, how you can use them, and the links to Amazon so people can buy them if they want, right there.
Yeah, definitely.
If you search for like either ScorpioMartianus or Polymathy, or just my name and this Familia Romana or Lingua Latina book review, you'll get either of those videos.
That's very useful. And recently, like with our video that we made, I think it's
such a pleasure, by the way. I'm so happy to have been your guest twice already this month. This is fantastic. Thank you, by the way.
Thank you so much too. But I think that this is a kind of a unique kind of content that I've never seen anything like that, right? Myself, spoken Latin,
the romance,
and testing this mutual intelligibility. I think it's just fascinating, but it also opens up doors to like a little bit different genre of content, where we could focus more on relationship between Latin and modern Romance languages a little bit more.
Right.
Because the approach for learning Latin is different depending on what your native language is, right? So if you already speak a Romance language, you could have a little bit different...
It'll be somewhat easier potentially. For example, obviously it's easier for you to learn Russian than it is for me because Polish and Russian are closely related. And knowing Italian before I started to learn Latin, it became that much easier for me because there are enough commonalities to improve that understanding. But I don't think the method is different. No, the method is still Familia Romana, the Lingua Latina series. The Familia Romana is the first primary book in that series. That method's the same for everybody. Absolutely, 100%. And you could use other methods. You could use just a classroom and a full immersion, something without any written material. You could use other books for sure. It's just I know that one works for everybody really well. No, I would not say that there's a different method, even if someone already speaks natively Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, or Romanian, or French.
But but when I watch your series, I kind of understand what's happening because I know English, I know some Spanish. So to me, like, even the structure is something that I would expect. But for someone who is from a Chinese speaker or Japanese speaker and they look into it...
That's a really good question. How much skill do they get to have in, say, English? Can they read the Roman alphabet and nothing else? Can they form basic sentences in English? And then I would like to know how they do. I do have a friend, Paulus, who appeared in my second video last week, who is Chinese and is teaching other Chinese people to speak Latin. Super cool guy. He got his degrees in Rome. That would be interesting for him to do that. But he apparently uses the very videos I've made of the Lingua Latina series that are just in Latin to great effect with very little need for Chinese at all. Because everybody in China, everybody, excuse me, a vast majority of people in China who get the opportunity for education to learn English specifically, that's all they need. That they can read the Roman alphabet and they know a few vocabulary words. That's all it seems to be necessary. It takes more work because if I mention, because if I say vocativus, nominativus, you get that because you've studied grammatical cases, and the terminology is familiar. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah, it's easier for you, but I do believe that given a patient teacher, and if someone's reading on their own with their own patience, they can figure because it's designed to let you figure it all out on its own, which is miraculous. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think again, determination. If you really are willing to spend time with it, you will learn it. You know, and inspiration is also very important. So, thanks to channels like yours, you see other people doing it. Like you see the social proof that this is possible. You know, you are more willing to continue and get through the hardships or difficulties. But yeah.
Also I was thinking of something else. You're talking about the modern Romance language interaction with Latin. Well, and we demonstrated that there is mutual comprehensibility is possible. I knew that would be possible. I didn't realize it would be so successful. And of course, the greatest credit goes to Gustavo and Linda and Isidor because they are just brilliant people and very enthusiastic people. But I do think it demonstrates the fact that what we call language, like this is Spanish and this is Portuguese and this is Italian and this is Latin, that those lines are not solid at all. That there are obvious standards that exist, but those standards have evolved on sort of national boundaries. They've been motivated by all kinds of things, cultural, political, and what we can say is that there's dialects that are different. You can, like the so-called dialects of Italy, there's 100 of them. Each one is its own language in its own right. When does mutual comprehensibility? People usually say, oh, if it's not mutually intelligible anymore, it's a different language. Well, we showed that Latin and these Romance languages, if spoken slowly enough, but especially the three of them, they're speaking Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish with each other, and they have almost no problem understanding each other, which is amazing. As an English speaker, we have almost no language that's close enough to ours to experience such a thing. And that comes with experience. They know each other well. They've chatted together for several hours, so they're also used to each other's voices. But still, it's not like an English person speaking with, again, someone from China and having nothing in common. So indeed, is it to call them a different language? Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that definition. But exactly how to define that, I think you, because of your channel, have broken down those barriers, those conventions that, I speak Spanish, so yeah, I maybe understand Italian. Maybe you could really know Italian. Maybe these are all just dialects of one big singular language group or something, which is also obviously true. Anyway, it's just interesting. There's the definition of language, especially with respect to, say, the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Those are three different languages, but usually it's the term that a language is a dialect with a navy is something that's thrown around, right? Or with the army or something, because it's something much more fluid than I think most of us who are teachers who say this is the proper standard would like to admit, which is fascinating.
Yeah,
and that's thanks to eco-linguists.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that my channel is kind of taking me into that direction by itself. It's not only like my ideas there. It's just because it's possible, it's working, and people are actively involved in this whole process. We are getting deeper and deeper into this mutual intelligibility phenomenon, and I'm also learning and discovering a lot of things, and I'm trying to think of ways how can that be used in language learning methodologies, like what kind of content
Yes.
we can create to facilitate language learning, leveraging this phenomenon, because it's clearly working. Now we just need to kind of find a way to have more control over it and produce content, because we learn through exposure, and we need content to enjoy. And
fear is fear is a big part of it. That fear of comfort I was talking about earlier, I think. The fear of making a mistake, the fear of making students uncomfortable, the fear of making yourself uncomfortable, such a huge inhibition. And that could go for any class of any type. But it's especially potent in language learning because you, the student, have to produce so much, potentially. But if all you have to produce is a test, well, your comfort level is much higher, potentially. And it's that kind of... it's that exposure. Because when we're little kids, other little kids will make fun of us if we say something funny or wrong. Teachers may be they'll correct us, but little kids are merciless, right? All little kids make fun of each other, and that's one of the reasons that language ends up not diverging quite as quickly as it does, because everybody's like, you said that word weird, and then like, well, let me change it. I can remember that happening a couple times when I was a kid. And also being that little jerk of a kid who said it to other people too. Yeah, it's interesting. We all experienced that, so that's it's a fascinating process. Someone asked too, like, why I got into the learning of Latin, and I have absolutely my father to thank for that. Who he was actually in the first video. His voice was the Julius Caesar voice. Robert Ranieri. He's an artist, and all of he's deeply inspired by the architecture and the culture of ancient Greco-Roman civilization. And his parents were from Italy, so that was a huge driving factor to me. I wanted to kind of explore my roots, if you will, to see like if that's something that I would enjoy as well, and I really do. So. Someone asked that question. So.
Yeah, that's good. So let me look at the chat. We've been talking for a while, and I just stopped paying attention to the chat. Sorry, everybody.
It's my fault, everyone. It's taking Norbert's attention.
No, it's just so many questions, which is really good. But for me, it's a little bit hard to navigate all of them. Let's see.
I'm looking for question marks.
Yeah.
Someone asked where I'm from. I'm from Pennsylvania in the United States.
Well, someone is asking, do you think that after learning Latin, it made it easier for you to understand and learn Romance languages?
Absolutely.
But
I learned Italian first. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. I was about to say that you learned Italian before.
Yeah,
Latin.
I had exposure to Italian because my dad speaks Italian. So I had a basic conversational ability by the time I got to college. Then I took, actually I skipped right to second 102 is what we usually call it, of Italian and of French. I took them simultaneously. It was great because the languages are so closely related, even more grammatically, I think, in some ways than Spanish and Italian, that I was every day learning the same thing in Italian class and French class. I found that very helpful, actually. Then I went to Italy and I learned Italian well to fluency. And then I found the Lingua Latina book and learned Latin. After that, I went back to French and Spanish and dabbled a little bit in Portuguese. I can understand a small Portuguese that's certainly spoken slowly. I can understand more than I rightly should, because once you know a Romance language and Latin, or if you know two Romance languages, you start to triangulate things that are familiar. I would never say that you need to learn Latin to have a great understanding of the Romance languages. No, you could just stay in that language and know it really well. But after you've done the effort, it's certainly an effort which helps. It's a lot, because it is this mother language, and you can see how it's fun. It's so fun to see then, Portuguese took this thing, Spanish took this, French took this, Romanian took this, Italian took this, and sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different, and you can see the origins of them. for me, that helps because Latin's something I know well, and if you know Latin to some degree, and then you compare it, that comparison's great. Like the little bit of Polish I know and understand is because of the Russian I've studied, right? So it's kind of like that. That's how I would answer that question.
Okay, I see. And some people asking here about teaching Latin to kids, for example, or turning them into native speakers. Like, do you have any stories or maybe opinions about that? Mm-hmm.
I had little kids, and their parents were fluent speakers, and I've known them from ages from 1 to 15, who have been teaching their own children since they were born. They're in this, younger generation. I'm 35, so I guess I still call myself in a younger generation for now, of people who are getting into this, and they're raising their kids to be at least bilingual. Yeah, and they speak Latin either perfectly fine or really well, or to a small degree, just like any bilingual children might be. And the question is whether or not that constitutes a living language. Well, like we just said, language, what a language is actually a fuzzy definition anyway, compared to dialect, which is much clearer as a term. But are they truly native speakers in a way, but they don't necessarily live in a large community, and that's a difference, which is worth considering. You'd have to have, there must be some critical mass of a population, not just where little kids get to meet each other to chat in Latin with each other for 8 days at a time, but for most of their experiences, most of their lives, such as the revival of Hebrew as a national language, for example. That's what that is. If such a thing were to happen in Latin, that would be amazing, but currently we're not at that level. Mm-hmm. But I encourage people to do so. They're going to be great Latin speakers and readers.
Yeah, I guess because of the internet now, like even if they don't have anybody around them speaking Latin, they can join an online community, and that's really powerful, because even if you teach your kid to speak Latin, like they won't continue unless they have like a social circle at their age, their interests that they want to hang out with and speak Latin with. But I think it's interesting, like if both parents speak Latin, or they just want to have this special connection with their kid, like, and speak Latin to them. I think it's also possible and interesting. Would you teach Latin to your kids?
Yes, I do hope to have children one day, and absolutely, I will raise them to speak Latin, among other languages. But yeah, Latin's so part of, it's just so in the middle of my heart now that, it's part of how I experience the world. And that's something that, I don't know if you've experienced that as a polyglot, but I have a lot of Japanese friends. When I lived there, I was speaking Japanese. And it was so funny because I would have other American coworkers who didn't know any Japanese. So I'd have all these enjoyable experiences of not only learning the language, but having these experiences which only make sense, and the funniness that can happen in Japanese. And I could tell the story, and then it wouldn't be funny at all because it was in translation. Mm-hmm. And the people didn't speak Japanese, so they couldn't appreciate what had happened. Mistaken terminology, whatever, something that happens that can be funny. So I realized, wow, this Japanese part of me that I've been cultivated by being with the people and speaking the language, that's something I really can't share with that many people either. It is a specific group. It's not something I can share with, say, all my family, nor learning Latin or Italian or German. It's I don't know, have you experienced something like that, or has anyone else experienced something out there where you have that passionate interest in a language and it's becomes so much a part of you, and then you can't share it with some of the people who are closer to you?
Well, definitely, my adventure with Hungarian, this is like such a niche thing, like, because in Polish, Hungarian sounds a little bit like English in terms, like English is, Hungarian is węgierski, and English is angielski. So whenever I say, I've studied Hungarian, they say, English? Like, uczę się węgierskiego. Angielskiego? You know, like they hear English there because they cannot believe that someone would learn Hungarian. So,
It's funny. I have a similar issue with talking about learning Latin. Like when we get these questions, these are good questions. How would you learn Latin? But normally it's like, why would you learn Hungarian? Why would you learn Latin? You know,
yeah. But one time, like after the first year at university, I went to a summer school in Hungary. It was, I think, 4 weeks of very intense course. It's just a summer school, you know. So people from all over the world would come, and everybody would speak Hungarian there, and you would make friends, you know, with people from other countries just speaking Hungarian. And that was a really, really great feeling. Like you'd really feel this sense of community. Like nobody asks you why you're learning Hungarian. Like everybody is enjoying it, you know, and it's not you don't feel like a weirdo, you know. You just feel like you're part of this community. You're in the right place. So that was a really cool experience. And so I can really see how important it is to have a community when you're learning a language, you know, to keep you going.
Yeah.
So now I kind of lost touch with this community, and my Hungarian got rusty, and it's not much important in my life anymore, Hungarian, you know. I would like to go back to it.
But you can go back to it.
Yeah. I think I'm able to like go back to it if I really want to do it again. But now I really think about if I'm going to commit to a new language, or if I'm going to commit to a new language or old language like Hungarian, I need to make sure that I have that community, and probably I would be building it up on my YouTube channel. Maybe there will be a section for that, you know, where I gather people who are interested in the same thing, and I'm not learning it just for myself, but making content for the community as well, you know. So that really motivates me. That would motivate me to learn something like that, like a new language, or going back to old language to practice it, because I want to be part of the community. So that's the main thing.
Cool. That's fantastic. I'd love to learn Hungarian someday. I promised my Hungarian Latin speaking friends that I would.
Yeah, I mean, I would learn all languages, you know, because I think like every language, every culture and community has something to offer, you know, for your self-development, but also just. But again, I would like to learn all of the languages, but because I can't, I need to think thoroughly. Like, what can I commit to, like truly for my life, to make sense in my life, but also. For the community, like if you're becoming a part of another community, you also need to think like, how are you going to accommodate that in your life?
Absolutely. Because I think when you want to learn something well, it's good to have a program, an efficient program that's already set before you, that if you're told, if you do all of these steps, however long it takes you, you will know it. And I'm thinking of flight school. When I went to flight school in the Army, it's a program that, you know, lasts a little bit more than a year. There's different sections, but you have to complete it. And if you do all of it, you will become a pilot and you will know how to fly. And there's not nearly as much conciseness for language. That's why I gush about this Lingua Latina per se illustrata series in the Familia Romana book, because if you consume all of that and nothing else, you will know everything you need to know for a solid foundation. And for each individual language, there's very little. There are some similar books to that one. They're all from the 60s, from Italian, French, and English, but not quite as good. That's what I wish were out there. If you gave me the Hungarian Familia Romana, I think I'd drop everything.
Yeah, so that just shows how important it is to produce content, you know, and document all the experiences, because we learn from that, you know.
Yeah.
And something new can be created based on what we've done so far. And because we are keeping the records, especially what you're doing on your channel, or your channels, like maybe you've made a variety of content which maybe is not the best for the algorithm, but it's there, you know, and people can access it, they can discover it. You also learned so much about making content on YouTube.
I'm still learning so much, you know, and I think it'll get there, and it's part of this expanding community as well. But I'm very happy with what I've been able to create, especially in collaboration with others up to this point, and all I see is bright things for the future, for myself and our whole Latin-speaking community. Oh, that's what this is, by the way, if anyone's wondering what QVIRITES is. It's a name from, okay, let me how I put this. When it was as simply as possible. So Rome, when it was just a city, it ended up going to war with the Sabines, but the Sabines and Romans made peace. So they decided to form one nation. And when they did that, the Romans decided to have two names. These Roman Sabines, they decided to call themselves both Romani, the people of Rome, and the people of Curai, the Quirites. So Quirites is the name that the ancient Romans would use for themselves at peace, but Romani was more their militaristic, their warlike name for themselves. So Quirites is a term that the Renaissance humanists who spoke and wrote Latin ended up calling themselves as well. Lorenzo Valla, namely, Laurentius Valla, he said like everybody who can speak Latin or a form of it is a Quiris. We're all Quirites. And the Greek name was Quirites. So this is a community that people can enter into. And that's what makes it, again, I just say it again, it's so worthwhile because of these Quirites, these Latin speakers and ancient Greek speakers who are so moved by this passion. So I had to say about that.
Yeah.
What other questions are there?
Let's have a look.
Yeah. Should we put out a question request? Hey, Pernox. Salve. Awesome.
There is lots of questions, but at the beginning. Okay, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your other project regarding ancient Greek, because that's something you're also involved in, right?
Yeah. Well, it's so these are people who are interested in it's not, of course, reading and speaking ancient Greek, just as we do in Latin. And my Latin's much better than my Greek because I've spent so much more time on it. Some of the more famous examples include Christophe Rico, whose school called the Polis Institute in Jerusalem. They teach using comprehensible input methods, teach not only ancient Greek, but also they've been experimenting with teaching truly ancient and dead languages like Babylonian and Assyrian and other things like Biblical Hebrew, Classical Arabic. Very interesting, all the stuff they're doing there. And ancient Greek is something that they're particularly famous for. And it's not just them. They exist in places like Greco Latino Vivo and the Scuola Latina that Roberto Carfagni has in Italy, Vivarium Novum. In Spain, I know there's at least one. So they're all over too, but I'd say maybe 10%, like 1/10 of number of people and of number of opportunities. Oh, Salvi also has a 2-day event, which is all in Greek as well every year, or they would have this year. They will have next year, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
So the same kinds of things exist, and it's smaller. The community of ancient Greek speakers, shall I say, or people who want to practice these methods, almost all of them already know Latin and can speak Latin. And then they're like, well, I'm also teaching ancient Greek, so let me learn how to speak ancient Greek. So it's kind of a skill transfer thing. And the ancient languages, Latin and ancient Greek, are the two languages of the Roman Empire. They are, it's a bilingual society for the most part back then.
Mm.
So it kind of makes sense for us who get into these ancient or classical languages to learn both. Latin's the gateway substance, if you will, and then ancient Greek is an inevitable conclusion. And then you have biblical Hebrew. People can speak biblical Hebrew, like the Aleph with Beth channel. Beth and Andrew were also in that video speaking biblical Hebrew, which was fantastic for people to see. And then there's ancient Egyptian, Stefano Vittori. He speaks ancient Egyptian, like Middle Kingdom ancient Egyptian. So it's amazing what you can start getting into and realize that these communities exist. The Latin one just happens to be by far the largest at this time. But I know those communities will be continuing to grow too, thanks a lot to the technology and the great people out there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's really awesome. I really want to see more of these communities rising to the top, because it's fascinating, and we need specialists and experts who are looking into our past. Even if we are not actively doing it and researching, we need people who are doing that because they are contributing to our society. They are discovering things about our past, and it's important to keep in touch with what we've been through and how we evolved as societies. And it doesn't have to be a lonely experience. Like in the past, like if you were like a language nerd or geek, like you were kind of isolated. You would just do it on your own, and maybe once a year you would go to a conference or something. But there were these geographical distances that isolated you so much. But now
it could be every day.
It could be every day.
Whatever language you want. Certainly Latin and ancient Greek, which you would think would be quite obscure, but they're not. Not anymore. At one time they were, but thank God for the technology. It's interesting too. I think part of the issue is also that some of the best of these people, no matter what generation they are, either our younger generation or older, are not technologically as inclined because they're not futurists. They're looking to the ancient the wisdom, so but eventually the people younger than us who are coming up, who will be more fluent than I in Latin and certainly in ancient Greek, they will master newer technologies that are easier to use than our current computers and YouTube and all of that, and they'll make stuff that's better and faster, and it'll blow our minds. And that's currently an issue, but this is a technological transition where the older generation didn't have the internet. I was in middle school when it became into our house, and then so I was right on the cusp. And then when 100 years from now, when everybody's had the internet, it'll be different. Hopefully, we don't have to be like the Matrix and put stuff in the back of our heads. I don't know. Maybe people will like that. I'm not sure I would, but what I think too, just as another comment of why to learn an ancient language like ancient Greek or Latin, that philosophy is per se, through itself, it is interesting and wonderful and fascinating. But for me, because I am super into the science fiction kind of utopian future that is possible in something like Star Trek, and I know you like Star Trek too. I hope we haven't lost any subscribers for admitting that we like Star Trek, but we're this nerdy, so I think it's okay.
Yeah.
And that kind of not just the society but the technology and that future is really interesting to me. The reason my channel is named ScorpioMartianus is because I'm greatly looking forward to the first human colonies on Mars, which will happen in the next couple decades. I watch every single SpaceX flight. I'm up to date with all the news on not just SpaceX, but Blue Origin and all these companies. And what I feel is that I get, in my own way, from my perspective, if I didn't have this connection to the ancient world and ancient, ideas and technologies and know what that ancient society was like, I wouldn't appreciate this new frontier that I see the world on as much as I do. I'm so into it. I'm so into seeing us. Yes, we're literally going to colonize a new world in this century and even more the century after. I mean, 2 centuries? 2 centuries is nothing. Like like the people I talk to, if you will, that I'm reading their material from 2,200 years ago, some of them. And I'm connected with them like they're talking to me now. 200 years from now, yeah, there'll be people speaking Latin on Mars and ancient Greek, no doubt. Everything's written in Latin and ancient Greek on Mars anyway. I might as well speak it there. And I know that to be a fact. And I know that it's sad in a way, because certainly we won't live to see the great cities of the new Republic of Mars, and 200 years from now. But those of us who have this passion for these ancient Latin and Greek, we know that we are links in a chain which stretches unbroken from the past to this future. If civilization continues more or less as it was, hopefully continuing to get better and more wonderful as we go, and I have every optimistic confidence that it will, well, then we're just setting the framework for the better things that are going to come. And part of that will be better education of language, certainly ancient languages like Latin and ancient Greek, but also for the everything else that will be in those societies. So I'm very excited about the future. I'm not just an ancient kind of person.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it all connects, right? The past and the future. It all meets here and now. Yeah. That's really amazing. So, I think it would be a very good conclusion to our conversation. Maybe before we go, you could just tell people where they can find you, and why would they go to ScorpioMartianus, and why would they go to see Polymathy, because you have those two main channels, right, that you would like to promote.
Yes, and then that's right, ScorpioMartianus and Polymathy. Here's a challenge to everybody: find the other YouTube channels that I don't post videos on very often. There is, of course, the Legio Tertia Decima, which is my shirt I'm wearing.
That's your third channel.
It's the YouTube side of the podcast. Yeah, it's just it's for the podcast, which can also be accessed through the Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Google Play, and so forth. But what do I do on ScorpioMartianus? My goal there was originally just to create content in the Latin language, so there would be very little to no either. So occasionally English subtitles, but mostly just auditory and visual input done in Latin, from vlogs to pedagogical material, like actually teaching it, ancient or literature of any period that's being recited in Latin. Because I also have an audiobook store, and that's also linked in all of my videos as well, where I sell audiobooks of recordings of Virgil's Eclogues and of Caesar's Gallic Wars, among other things that I'm making. But I have a lot of those things already on my channel, like hours and hours and hours and hours. But otherwise, yeah, music videos are in Latin as well on my channel. So a whole bunch of things, but they're all in Latin. And as I've gotten more into ancient Greek, some things in ancient Greek as well. And as for the Polymathy, so Polymathy is because I'm interested in so many different things. I made the channel to be a place where I could then talk about all the things I'm interested in. The past 2 or 3 years, I've been doing almost exclusively Latin and ancient Greek things. So I have a lot of videos out there about Latin and ancient Greek. But I have other videos too about cursive handwriting. In the United States, at least, teaching children how to write in cursive is becoming less and less frequent. And so I taught myself how to do cursive 6 years ago, and as an adult. And I'm so glad I did, because now I can write nice looking letters. I can write handwritten notes that look a lot better. So that's one of the so I do basically anything that interests me on Polymathy. The Latin and ancient Greek things will always be there. I talk on there about, like I mentioned, the ecclesiastical pronunciation. I have a whole video about in defense of the ecclesiastical pronunciation of Latin, because I'm known as this diehard trying to reconstruct the first century BC pronunciation of classical Latin. Why on earth would I have any affinity at all for ecclesiastical pronunciation? And I explain it there. Why I think it's just as justified in many respects, for sure. And so lots of my research, a lot of stuff in my research, the Lucian pronunciation of ancient Greek and things there. A way to communicate my other ideas, and some of them are collaborative projects as well with, say, Raphael Torrigiano, who's come on to my channel a couple times. So hopefully that's probably more than you asked for. Gracias. Sumas ago mi Norbert.
Yes. So see you next time, everybody. Bye.
Valete. Bye.